The earliest inhabitants of this area we call the Paleo Indians. Each area has some distinctive types of pottery. The arrowheads at that time are small and they're triangle shaped. We're uncovering evidence of people that no longer live in the county. Hi and welcome. We're going to be talking about Native American archaeology in Jefferson County today. Hi, I'm Ken Burkett. I'm the retired executive director from the Jefferson County Historical Society in Brookville. I'm also a field associate with the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh as a field archaeologist, and have been working on archaeology of Jefferson and Clarion County for many, many years. I got my start in archaeology probably around the age of 12 years old when I started walking the fields around Somerville looking for arrowheads in the spring after the farmers plowed and it rained on the fields. Found my first arrowhead when I was 12 years old. For many years I recorded the archaeology sites that I knew of. I think we currently have over 140 different sites on the Red Bank Valley watershed that have been recorded as known sites that expand over a wide or long period of time. I've also excavated a number of rock shelters in the valley as an archaeologist. The rock shelter itself was formed probably during the last ice age, and you can see that some of these rocks are broken and separated and on the verge of just moving out over the hill. And that's how these sites are created. And there's quite a few of these throughout the county. A number of them have been formally excavated. The biggest end of them have been bothered and disturbed by people just looking for artifacts. As you look down over the hillside, you'll notice that this site is on a expressly nice vantage point where if you were camping here, you have a nice view of the valley below. For hunting purposes, there's a spring about 50 yards below us here, so there's always fresh water available. And it's just a really good place to camp. You get the sunlight in the morning hours and in the late afternoon hours here, so even in the wintertime it would have helped warm a little bit to camp in this site. This area was all virgin timber. The trees would have been, not huge as you think of like the sequoias, but they were very large. The white pines would have been over 100 feet tall. And this area would have been primarily pine and hemlock on this hillside. The tops of the hills usually had a number of hardwoods, the oak, the chestnut, the beech trees, the acorn trees. But a lot of times these valleys on the hillsides were pretty much conifers and not a lot of food down in there. But they would have been open. You would have been able to see down through the woods much further than you can today with the underbrush growing back from when we built the park. Originally the topsoil in here, where you can see over in the bank over here, was about 12 inches deeper than it is today down in the bare rock. So we laid out a grid system and excavated the unit in 1 by 1 meter grids, actually bisected into smaller units from that, and excavated from the top down very slowly, carefully recording all the artifacts we found, and currently have those all documented down at the museum. We did find a number of projectile points that provide a sequence of habitation, as I said earlier, over about 5,000 years. The back part of the shelter had some prehistoric ceramic pottery sherds in it, and there's a small cave-like opening in the back side of the shelter. And it's very dry back in there, and unusual in western Pennsylvania. There was a lot of bone preservation in there, a lot of animal bones. Some were cut and cracked open by the Native Americans for the marrow, and some were obviously brought in there by different animals over a period of years. So we have deer bones and then small mammal bones. and some other things mixed in with it. One of the things I want to stress is this was a controlled excavation. It was conducted by volunteers that assisted on the site, but we did carefully excavate, we did carefully document. So many times sites like this are simply looted by people not really knowing what they're doing and sifting for artifacts, and they destroy the context and the important information that would be revealed if you carefully did the dig properly under supervision. Yeah, the earliest inhabitants of this area we call the Paleo Indians, and we know that they were living here during or just shortly after the last ice age. At the very end of the ice age, there was the glacier fronts advanced down as far as Venango County and into Butler County, but didn't really extend over this far. So if you went west of here over to Franklin, PA, there was a huge wall of ice, which was the glacial front. Coming off that wall of ice was something called a kabatic wind, which was a wind blowing off of these huge ice sheets that extended clean to the North Pole. And during the summer months, it was always fairly cold here, and there would always be a wind blowing coming off of that. The landscape at that time didn't have the forest that we know of today. Most of it was a tundra environment, a grassland or steppe environment. But it was inhabited by a lot of animals. You know, we had mammoths and mastodons and short-faced bears and large cats here, and just a myriad of animals that we don't even think about today. And the first people that come into this area were encountering those animals, primarily caribou, we think was a very early animal that was frequently hunted by the early hunters. We do find projectile points, rarely from that time period, usually up on the high ground. And they're a specialized type of point called a fluted point or a Clovis point. Yeah, this is a fluted or Clovis projectile point. Actually, this was part of the E.M. Parker collection. Mr. Parker had an Indian museum in Jefferson County. And this particular point, I believe, is from up in the Reynoldsville area. This is the flute that extends down the center of the point. There's one on each side. And the flute was for hafting, where the shaft would have been extended up this far and been very tightly wrapped around the outside, so the projectile point would have been very, very secure. You know, if you're hunting big game such as caribou, you don't want the spear point to snap off or become dislodged. So this is a very unique style. It's this outline and shape and the indentation at the base helps define this as a Clovis point. Archaeologists can recognize them very easy. They're extremely rare, especially up in this area. There's only several dozen known from Jefferson County, period. After the glaciers retreated north, and this took thousands of years to happen, progressing behind the ice sheets would have been the different types of forest that moved into the area. First was the arboreal forest, which is in northern Canada today, which is primarily made up of different types of pines and scrubs. That eventually was replaced by the pine hemlock forests that the first Europeans would have seen when they came here. The ridge tops or the high ground would have had many of the hardwoods, the beech, the oak, the chestnut, the nut trees. So if you were a Native American at that time, you pretty much lived off the land. We know that they were traveling up and down the Red Bank Creek and the tributaries and dug out canoes. They were a mobile group, probably living within a defined area, but it was primarily subsistence on hunting and gathering the different edibles, the plant edibles and the nut edibles at various times of the year. You know, in Jefferson County, there are numerous prehistoric trails that we still know about. You know, they were the same trails that the first white settlers arrived in this area on, that were still in existence, of people moving around the landscape. And also the rivers. You know, the Red Bank Creek was a navigable stream, for dugout canoes, and we find a lot of evidence of people coming down the Red Bank by dugout canoe and camping on the shores. And the evidence is lithic materials, cherts and other types of stone that's only found in the very eastern part of the state: jasper, rhyolite, argillite, quartzite. And it's not found around here, but we find artifacts made out of that along the banks of the Red Bank Creek and campsites, and that is evidence, direct evidence, of people that were coming down the stream that started their journey someplace over in the Susquehanna Basin and forded into the Red Bank at some of the headwater, ford sites. They were actually carrying the canoes up over the hill and from the Susquehanna and depositing them into the Red Bank and coming downstream towards the Allegheny. We found the fish basket site after it was plowed for the first time in about 40 years, and the farmer was deep plowing, and he happened to intersect a lot of the features that were still below the normal plow zone. He went a little bit deeper than normal, and among the plow debris there was prehistoric pottery, projectile points, bone fragments, evidence of hearths. So it was pretty intensive, and we realized that there were some large villages still there, still partially intact under the ground surface. These are late villages that would tie in with the Native Americans at the time when they were farmers, starting around 900 AD up through about 1350 AD. And these people were living in fortified settlements of houses, growing corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, and some other crops. About 900 AD, ceramic pottery becomes a common thing. And again, this ties in with agriculture, where they're using the pottery vessels to store things in, and they're also using them to cook in. Each area of Pennsylvania has some distinctive types of pottery based on the people that were living there. And primarily, the ladies are making the pottery and decorating it with a communal style. A lot of the villages use similar styles at similar times. So you made your pots the same way that your mother did, or the same way that your grandmother did. And archaeologists can follow groups of people through time by studying the various types of pottery that show up on these villages. This is called a fish basket cord mark pottery vessel. This is one of the pots that we excavated on the site, on the Clarion County side of the river at Fish Basket. This is restored. The original pot was broken into numerous pieces, but the shape is typical of these wide, rounded body pots. Sometimes there's decoration put around the rim. This particular pot does not have decoration, so the rim comes up and it flares out so you can pour with it. The surface of the pot is called cord marked, and this was formed by Native Americans taking a paddle that was wrapped with cordage, or what we think of as string, and as they were making the pot, they had one hand inside the pot, and they would take the outside of the pot, and they were slapping the slabs of clay to build the pot together, and it leaves this exterior marking on it, which they just left there. Sometimes they smoothed it with their hands, but this particular pot has it fairly evidence of cord marking in the outside. And most of the pots at Fish Basket have this type of shape with the rim at the top like that out flares a little bit. And these are typical household cooking pots. This is what your supper would have came in back then if you were having squirrel stew or deer stew or something with corn and meat and other things cooked together in it. I would imagine they probably tasted a little bit like mud after it was cooked in this. Most of the pottery vessels, when we find them, are, like this. They're fragmented. This is just a part of a rim of a pot. The rest of it has not yet been reconstructed. So it's like putting together a three-dimensional puzzle. They were broken before they discarded them, and sometimes if they buried them complete in the ground, just the surface and the pressure of the ground pushing down on them, or the tractor running over the surface over the years, compressing the soil, has fractured them and broke them. So it's typically how you find them. Native Americans for 10,000 years used a device called the atlatl, which was a spear thrower. That consists of a spear and a handle that the spear mounts into, and it's propelled by throwing it in a large arc. About 900 AD, the invention of the bow and arrow, which probably came to here from the southwest and migrated up through with people interacting and trading with each other, and that enabled a much more rapid fire, easily carried group of projectiles, and the projectile points, the arrowheads at that time, which are now true arrowheads, are small and they're triangle shaped, and they're very easily identified on the prehistoric and archaeology sites. At Fish Basket, we dug a total of 6 different villages. The earliest village is about 900 AD, and then there would be successive periods of time when these people would vacate the area and then come back a number of years later and reoccupy the site. Maybe the firewood grew up, maybe the soil became refertile and allowed them to come back and reform the area. The game was replenished naturally. So we have these intermittent periods of occupation and vacancy, and carbon dating gave us an entire suite of when these villages were here. And not only that, but sometimes by comparing other sites to the south on the Mahoning Creek or on the Crooked Creek and so forth, we can find where these people moved to and spent the interim period of time before they come back here. What we don't always read in the history books is that disease brought to this continent by the white traders entirely decimated these tribes up through here in the 15 and early 1600s, leaving just a small percentage of who was originally settled here. And what happened is after the French and Indian War in the 1750s, most of the Native American people moved westward into Ohio, or some were combined with the Seneca up north. But prior to that, these populations were decimated. To set it a little bit differently, the county histories, Kate Scott writes in 1888 that there was very little evidence of the Native Americans in Jefferson County. And that's probably true. The first settlers came here in 1804, and there were certainly people wandering around the area, Native Americans that were still here, but there weren't any large villages here at that time that we know of. But there really wasn't a lot of evidence or people moving about the landscape. So the first impression was that there was very few Native Americans ever here. The time period when the first Europeans start showing up, the trade goods, the things that they're trading over in the Chesapeake Bay for animal pelts primarily, brass kettles, beads, metal tomahawks, knives. A little later on, they start trading for guns and rifles. As soon as the Native Americans had access to these, to them, mystical and modern tools, they abandoned, for the most part, things made out of stone and flint. Things like a stone axe, which you try to cut a tree down with, and they frequently broke, where suddenly now I have a metal axe that's much sharper and I can do the work with. And they like those materials very quickly or very well. One of the things to remember with archaeology is we're uncovering evidence of people that no longer live in the county. And the museum, the History Center, and archaeologists in general work to preserve this knowledge, uncover it, and identify who these lost cultures are. Today, you're viewing part of our Native American exhibit, which is in our main gallery with an overall exhibit called Living on the Land. Here in this exhibit, we have several dioramas. We have a diorama of one of the houses at Fish Basket Indian Village down near New Bethlehem. We have a diorama and artifacts that we found in our rock shelter out at Scripture Rocks Heritage Park. And we have a number of display cases that cover travel and trade, hunting and gathering, entrance of agriculture, and European contact. We also have an 18-foot replica dugout canoe and some of the things that people might have been carrying with them as they were traveling up and down the Red Bank. They're hands-on items for kids to touch. And we also have a number of cases below the diorama with different projectile points identified by time period and the names of the points. Up on the wall behind me, we have castings of Native American petroglyphs. They're drawings etched in stone from down on the Allegheny River near Parker, Pennsylvania, and an extensive video and stories to go with all these items. So we hope that you will have time to follow this interest and stop by the History Center and check this out and many of our other exhibits.